He didn't even stop kissing her when he heard the door open. That's the part that broke something permanent inside Vivian Sterling. Not the betrayal itself, not the sight of her husband's hands in her baby sister's hair, not the champagne flutes on the nightstand, not the way Claire's dress had been pulled from one shoulder like it had been done 100 times before. It was that he heard the door, and he didn't stop. He pulled back slowly, deliberately, like a man who had already decided he didn't owe her the decency of pretending. Damien Cross turned and looked at his wife of 15 years with the same flat, unreadable expression he used when he was deciding whether someone deserved to keep breathing. And Vivian was still holding the pregnancy test in her coat pocket. If this story already has your heart pounding, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss what's coming next. These stories go places you won't see coming. Drop a like on this video and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that doorway. Let's go back to the night Vivian Sterling stopped being a wife and started becoming something far more dangerous. The drive up had taken 4 hours. Vivian had left the city at noon, which was already a miscalculation. She'd told herself she would leave at 10, but the doctor's appointment had run long, and then she'd sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes just holding the test result printout without being able to fold it in half. 11 weeks. The ultrasound image was grainy and small, barely more than a smudge with a heartbeat, but she'd stared at it until her eyes burned. She'd had 2 of those printouts before, once at 9 weeks, once at 14. She knew better than to feel certain about anything yet, but she felt certain. She couldn't help it. The road through the mountains had been clear, dry, which was unusual for Christmas Eve. The sky went purple-gray early. She passed a gas station, a diner with a neon Santa in the window. 2 pickup trucks headed the other direction with trees strapped to their roofs. She had the radio on low, some old Patsy Cline station she'd found by accident, and she thought about how she was going to tell him. Damien wasn't a man who showed things. She knew that going in. She'd known it at 22 when she met him at a fundraiser she wasn't supposed to be at, and she'd understood it more fully with every year that followed. He didn't cry at funerals. He didn't laugh at movies. When she'd lost the first pregnancy, he'd sat beside her hospital bed for 6 hours without saying a single word, and that silence had been the most present she'd ever felt him be. She'd practiced phrases in the car. "We're having a baby. Too bright. I'm pregnant. Too clinical. I found out today, and I needed you to be the first to know." That one felt true, at least. She'd rolled it around in her mouth for 50 miles. The house came into view just before 6. It had been her parents' place originally. 3 acres on a wooded hillside, a stone exterior, a wraparound porch that her father had built himself over 2 summers in the 90s. When her parents died within 14 months of each other, 6 years ago, Vivian had inherited it outright. It had felt like an anchor, like proof that something in her life had roots. Damien had suggested more than once that they sell it, but she'd refused every time. And that refusal was one of the few things she'd ever held against him without apology. She'd told him she was staying in the city through the holiday. Business to handle, she'd said. He hadn't pushed. He rarely did, which she used to read as respect, and had only recently begun to read as indifference. The Christmas lights were on. She registered that first. Her husband never put up Christmas lights. He considered them a waste of effort, but the porch was strung with white lights, and the windows in the front room were glowing warm and amber through the curtains, and there was a second car in the driveway, a silver coupe she didn't recognize. She slowed, pulled in behind it. She sat for a moment with the engine running. She told herself it was nothing. Staff. A car that needed to be moved. Some arrangement she hadn't been told about because she and Damien had been communicating in logistics for the past 3 months. All texts and brief calls, and nothing that went deeper than "I'll be home Thursday," and "the accountant needs the documents by Friday." She turned off the engine and got out. The front door wasn't locked. It was never locked. Damien thought locked doors were for people who hadn't made everyone in a 10-mile radius afraid to try anything. She stepped into the hallway. The house smelled like wood smoke and something floral, perfume or candles, something sweet and feminine that she didn't associate with herself. She heard laughter from the back of the house. It was brief, half a laugh, cut off like whoever made it remembered they should be quieter. A woman's laugh. And then the particular sound of a door closing that's being closed carefully, with intention. Vivian stood in the hallway with her coat still buttoned. Later, she would try to explain to herself why she didn't call out, why she didn't say his name or clear her throat, or make any of the sounds a person makes when they're arriving home and want everyone to know they're there. She couldn't explain it. Something closed in her chest, some quiet animal instinct that said, "Wait, look first." She walked to the bedroom at the end of the hall. The door was open 2 inches. She pushed it. Damien Cross was not a man who looked caught. Even then, with his wife's sister's face still turned toward him and his hand braced against the headboard, he did not look caught. He looked interrupted. There was a distinction, and Vivian's brain recorded it with the sharp, involuntary clarity of a camera shutter. He heard the door. He heard it, and he didn't stop, not immediately. And then he pulled back slowly, turned his head, and looked at her. His expression didn't change. Claire made a sound, something between a gasp and a word, maybe her name, maybe an apology, and scrambled for the sheet, which was a strange thing to do because she was still partially dressed. The silver dress. Vivian recognized it. She told Claire that dress looked beautiful on her 3 weeks ago at a dinner. "Vivian," Damien's voice. Flat, almost careful, the way you'd speak to someone standing too close to a ledge. She didn't answer. She couldn't locate her voice. It was there. She knew it was there. But she couldn't find it in the wreckage happening inside her chest. "This isn't," Claire started. "Don't." Vivian's voice came out wrong, too quiet, too controlled. She turned and walked back down the hall. She ended up in the kitchen. She didn't know why. She sat down at the table, the same wooden table she'd done homework at when she was 12, and she put both hands flat on the surface and breathed, just breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth, like someone who had been trained to keep themselves together in moments that wanted to pull everything apart. The pregnancy test was still in her coat pocket. She didn't take it out. She heard footsteps, Damien's, she knew his gait cold. And then he came through the kitchen doorway and stopped. He had his shirt on now, buttoned. He looked exactly like himself, like nothing had happened that required him to look any different. "How long?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. That pause told her everything. "Vivian." "How long, Damien?" He exhaled, looked at the window. The Christmas lights from the porch were reflecting in the glass, small white dots. 7 months. 7. The number landed like something physical. 7 months ago, she'd had a procedure to remove what was left of their 3rd failed pregnancy. 7 months ago, she'd lain in a hospital bed while a nurse asked her if she had someone at home to look after her, and she'd said yes, and she hadn't been wrong. He'd been home. He'd been present. He'd brought her soup and sat beside her and been the silent, solid Damien Cross that she had built 15 years around, and he had been sleeping with her sister for 7 months. Why her? She heard the question come out and was surprised by it. It wasn't the question she'd expected herself to ask. She would have expected anger, accusations, something louder. Instead, she was asking why Claire, which was really asking something worse, whether she herself had become someone he didn't want anymore. "That's not a conversation worth having tonight," he said. "Excuse me? You're upset, I understand that, but we're not going to get anywhere." "Don't." She stood up. The chair scraped hard. "Don't you manage me right now. Don't do that." His jaw tightened. "I'm not managing you. You manage everything. It's what you do." She was shaking now, not the crying kind, the other kind, the kind that lives in your hands and makes you feel like if you squeeze anything hard enough, it might shatter. "You managed me for 15 years, and I thought it meant you trusted me. I thought silence was your version of—" She stopped, shook her head. 7 months. Claire. She said her sister's name like a word she'd never said before, like it had a new meaning now and the old one was just gone. He stood there and said nothing. She walked past him, picked up her purse from the entryway, and went outside. She sat in her car for a long time. The porch lights were still on. Inside, she could see shapes moving past the windows. Damien, and then Claire, who came to stand at the glass for a moment, and then moved away. Vivian watched them without feeling anything she could name. She was too many things at once, and they canceled each other out and left something that wasn't quite numbness but worked the same way. She took the pregnancy test out of her pocket. She looked at it. She put it back. She had driven 4 hours to tell her husband she was carrying their child. She was carrying the child she had waited for, bled for, grieved for, across 15 years and 3 losses, and more hope than any person should have to sustain. And he had spent 7 of those months folding himself around her sister, and she was sitting in a car on a cold hillside on Christmas Eve with white lights blurring in the window glass. The thing that happened next, she would not fully understand until much later. A car door opened. She didn't see it happen. She heard it, the soft mechanical chunk of a car door at the edge of the property, close to the tree line. She turned and squinted. A man was standing beside a dark SUV that she hadn't noticed before, parked half off the road, almost invisible in the shadow. He was on a phone call, pacing slowly, which was why she'd caught the movement. He was far enough away that she couldn't make out his face clearly in the dark. But she knew the posture, the suit, the way the hand not holding the phone was tucked into the jacket pocket, fingers resting against whatever was holstered there. She knew, with the bone-deep recognition of a woman who had spent 15 years inside that world, that this man was not a guest. He was not a neighbor. It was not someone who had pulled over to make a call. He was watching the house. She kept very still in the driver's seat. Her hand moved slowly, without thought, to turn off the interior light before she opened the door. She waited, counted. The man ended his call, stood for a moment looking at the house, and then got back in the SUV. He didn't leave, just sat there, engine off, dark. Vivian looked back at the house, at the windows, at the silver coupe in the driveway that she still hadn't placed. Who drove that car? She pulled out her phone. The plate on the coupe was visible from where she was parked if she squinted and used her phone's camera to zoom. She got the number. She stared at it. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled to a name she hadn't called in over a year. Marcy Aldrin, who worked for a firm that did things for Damien that weren't put on paper. It was Christmas Eve. Marcy answered anyway. "I need a plate run," Vivian said, "and I need it quiet." A pause. "Is everything all right?" "Run the plate and I'll tell you." The results came back in 9 minutes. The silver coupe was registered to a shell company, 3 levels deep, which was a level of effort that meant someone knew what they were doing. The shell connected, eventually, to a LLC that Vivian recognized. She recognized it because Damien had walked her through it once, years ago, during a period when he'd been explaining to her how the money moved and what she'd need to know if anything ever happened to him. That LLC held assets belonging to Vincent Kane, Damien's lieutenant, the man who ran the East Side operations, the man Damien had trusted for 11 years, which in that world was longer than most marriages. Vivian sat in the car and felt something settle in her, cold and very still. She went back through it, slowly. Claire had been coming around more in the past 8 months. Family dinners, drop-ins, showing up at the apartment when Vivian wasn't home. At the time, Vivian had read it as her sister missing her, making an effort. But Claire had also been present at 2 events organized by Kane's people. Not prominently, peripheral. The kind of peripheral that you don't notice unless you know to look. The kind of peripheral that someone arranged. She thought about the man in the SUV, about the way he'd been watching the house, not the way a husband's jealous second watches a house, the way a soldier watches a position. She thought about 7 months. 7 months was enough time to build something, to run someone inside a marriage, to use a lonely younger sister as a key. She put her car in reverse and backed quietly down the drive. She did not call anyone. She didn't go back inside. She drove 3 miles to the motel on the highway that she knew was owned by a man who owed Damien a favor, large enough that he'd never let anyone check whether Vivian Sterling had been there. She got a room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She took the pregnancy test out of her pocket one more time. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it in the nightstand drawer, lay down fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling and started thinking. She didn't sleep. She had had insomnia in her late 30s that the doctors called stress-related, and she called having some awareness of what her life actually was. She'd learned to use the hours. There was a version of sleeplessness that was passive and suffocating, and there was a version that was almost mechanical, your brain running calculations in the dark because no one could interrupt it. She ran calculations. Vincent Kane had been with Damien since before Vivian entered the picture. She knew him the way you know anyone you see at every table, every dinner, every difficult conversation that can't be had over the phone. He was 41, unmarried, meticulous in a way that looked calm from the outside and was something else entirely, once you understood what the calm was covering. Damien trusted him with the operation's eastern expansion. That meant money, muscle, and access to people who would do things without requiring explanations. She thought about what a man like that would need if he wanted to remove Damian Cross from power. He would need information, the internal kind, schedules, security protocols, the names of people who could be turned, the kind of information that wouldn't come from anyone in the organization willingly, because everyone in the organization was afraid of Damian, unless you could get close to someone Damian trusted without suspicion. A wife doesn't raise flags. A wife who's grieving, withdrawn, slightly absent, in the way that women are allowed to be absent when their marriages are struggling. She moves through that world with near invisibility. Nobody watches her. Nobody worries about what she overhears. But Claire was different. Claire Sterling had always been the younger, softer, more pliable version of Vivian. Not stupid. Vivian had never thought her sister was stupid, and it was important to be accurate about that. But she was the kind of person who needed to be wanted, the kind who would read a man's attention as a gift, and not ask whether the gift came with a condition attached. She was 29. Damian was 53. The power differential alone was enough to make most women blind. Cain had used her. That was what Vivian kept coming back to, lying on that motel bed in the dark. Not that Damian had failed her. Not that her sister had betrayed her. Both of those things were true, and both of them were going to cost a great deal. But underneath them, running like an ugly current, was the shape of Vincent Cain's plan. He was building something, a coup, maybe. The kind of thing that you have to do carefully in that world because failure isn't just failure, it's a funeral. And for some reason he was doing it through this house, through this marriage, through this Christmas Eve. She needed to know why. She got up at 4 in the morning, made the coffee from the machine on the dresser, and sat at the small table by the window. The highway was empty. A truck passed every few minutes going somewhere. She opened her phone and started pulling threads. Damian had a meeting in the city on December 28th. She knew that because she still had access to the shared calendar they used for household logistics, and whoever managed Damian's schedule had been lazy about keeping personal and professional entries separate. She scrolled back through the past 3 months. Meetings she'd half noticed. A pattern of absences that she'd attributed to the expansion work Cain was running. She cross-referenced it against her memory of where Vincent had been, the dinners she'd attended, the conversations she'd caught fragments of. By 5:30, she had the shape of something she couldn't yet prove but could feel the weight of. The way you can feel a room's dimensions in the dark. Cain wasn't just feeding information to an outside party. He was building support internally. There were at least 3 names she could identify as potentially compromised. Men who'd been closer to Cain's orbit in recent months. Men who'd been subtly distanced from Damian's inner circle. That kind of realignment didn't happen naturally. Someone was engineering it. And Damian, for all his instincts, was not seeing it. Because Damian was distracted. 7 months distracted. She felt a cold clarity arrive that had nothing to do with anger. She had moved past the betrayal. Not past the pain of it that would take a long time, but past the paralysis. She was somewhere else now, somewhere more functional. She thought about the child. 11 weeks. A heartbeat she'd seen on a screen 24 hours ago. A son or a daughter who would inherit, through no choice of their own, whatever she left them. Not just property or money. The structure of the world they were born into. Whether that world would still be standing when they arrived in it. She put her hand flat on her stomach. She made a decision. What? She called Damian at 7. He answered on the first ring, which told her he hadn't slept either. "Where are you?" he asked. "I need you to listen to me," she said. "Not react, just listen." A beat. "All right. Something is happening inside your operation. I don't have everything yet, but I have enough to tell you that you need to stop trusting your instincts on this one and start trusting me. Can you do that?" Silence. She could hear him breathing. She counted 3 full seconds. "What did you find?" he said. "The car in the driveway last night, silver coupe. I ran the plates." She told him what she'd found. She told him about the SUV and the tree line. She told him about the pattern in the calendar. She did it in order, without editorializing, because she'd learned 15 years ago that Damian Cross processed information better when it came clean, without emotion attached. When she finished, the silence was different than before. "Cain," he said, "I don't know yet, but that's where the plates point." Another silence. She heard him move. A door closing, the change in ambient sound that meant he'd stepped somewhere private. Why are you telling me this instead of walking away? She had thought about this answer very carefully. Because I'm not done, she said, with any of it. I'm not done, and I'm not going to let someone else decide how this ends. She didn't tell him about the pregnancy. Not yet. That was hers, for now. That was the one thing she was going to hold back until she understood the full shape of what she was walking into. Come back to the house, he said. Not yet. I need 24 hours. Can you give me 24 hours without making any moves? Vivian, Damien. His name, the way she used it, landed the way she needed it to. 24 hours. A long pause. All right, he said. She hung up and looked at the highway. The sky had gone pale gray at the edges. Christmas morning, somewhere out beyond the tree line. She drank her coffee. She thought about what came next. Claire called at 8:47. Vivian stared at her sister's name on the screen for 3 full rings before she answered. She kept her voice level. Not warm, but not jagged, either. Controlled. I don't want to talk about light, Claire said immediately. Her voice had the texture of someone who'd been crying for hours and had arrived at a strange hollow calm on the other side of it. I just need you to know that it wasn't, I know how it looked. I know what you think. What do I think? Vivian asked. Claire was quiet for a moment. That I wanted to hurt you. Did you? No, Vivian, no, a breath. He pursued me. It was months before I kept saying no, and then a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something else entirely. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything. Vivian let the apology sit there for a moment without touching it. How long have you been talking to Vincent Kane? She asked. The silence on the other end was wrong. Too long. The wrong shape for confusion or surprise. The shape of someone calculating. What? Claire said. Vincent Kane, Damien's lieutenant. How long has he been in contact with you? I barely know Vincent. I've met him twice. Claire. Vivian kept her voice completely flat. Don't. You're not good at this, and I need you to stop before you make it worse. When did Kane first reach out to you? Another silence. Shorter this time. And then the sound of her sister's composure coming apart, the intake of breath that meant the real thing was finally close to the surface. He called me last April, Claire said. He said he was concerned about you, that that the stress was affecting you and he thought if you had family close, it would help. A pause. He said I should come around more. He made it sound like it was for you. April, the month after the 3rd miscarriage. Vivian closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the highway was still there, still pale and empty, and she was still here, still breathing, still functional. He used you, she said. Vivian, listen to me very carefully. She kept her voice completely even. I need you to do exactly what I tell you for the next 72 hours. Not what feels right. Not what Damien says. Not what anyone else says. Me. Can you do that? What are you going to do? Claire's voice was small. I'm going to find out exactly how much of this you understood, and then I'm going to figure out whether that matters. She paused. But right now, I need you to think back to every conversation you had with Kane, every one, and I need you to write it down. Why? Because, Vivian said, he thought he could reach through my marriage to get to my husband. And before this is over, I want to understand every single decision he made, starting with the first one. She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she opened a fresh note on her phone and started writing down everything she knew. Everything, from the first piece to the last. And as she wrote, the shape of it became cleaner, harder, more distinct. She was not going to fall apart. She was going to be precise. She was going to be every bit as patient and deliberate and unsentimental as the man who had raised her to never show weakness, and the man she'd married who had reinforced every lesson her father started. She was going to be more dangerous than either of them had prepared for, because neither of them had ever had anything to lose that mattered this much. She put her hand on her stomach again, just for a moment, just long enough to remind herself what she was doing this for. Then she put the car in drive and headed back toward the mountain. The mountain road was dry, but the sky had gone the color of dirty wool, and Vivian drove with both hands on the wheel and the heat on low because she didn't want to get comfortable. She needed to stay sharp. Sharpness was the only currency she had right now. The house came into view at the same curve where it always did. Same stone face, same porch, same trees crowding the upper hillside. And she pulled in and sat for a moment with the engine running. The silver coupe was gone. That meant Claire had left, or been asked to leave, and Vivian wasn't sure yet which of those two things she needed it to be. She got out. The cold hit her face like something with intent. Damien was in the kitchen when she walked in, standing at the counter with a coffee cup in his hand and his back to the door, which was the only version of vulnerability she had ever seen from him. His back turned, unguarded, waiting. He heard her come in and didn't move immediately. Let the moment sit. She recognized the calculation in it and didn't react. "She's gone," he said. "I know." Vivian set her purse on the table. Same table, same chairs. The kitchen smelled like coffee and the faint residue of last night's wood smoke, and she told herself the familiarity of it was just a room, just walls, nothing that had any claim on her nerves. He turned around. He looked like a man who had been awake all night and was refusing to let it show in anything except the set of his jaw, which was tighter than usual. He looked at her for a long moment. "You look like you've been thinking for 6 hours," he said. "I have been thinking for 6 hours. Sit down." "I'd rather stand." He set the cup down. That was one of his tells. When he set something down with intention, he was shifting into a different gear. She watched it happen and positioned herself accordingly, not backing up, not moving toward him, just holding her ground at the far end of the table. "Tell me what you want to do," he said. "I want to know how deep Kane's access goes before we do anything. Any move you make against him right now. Anything visible. And he'll know we're onto him. He'll pull back, change the pattern, and we lose the trail." Damien's eyes didn't move from her face. "You think he has people watching the organization?" "I think he has people watching this house. I think the SUV last night wasn't a coincidence. I think he sent Claire here the same way you send an advance team, to assess the ground before you commit to a position." A muscle in Damien's jaw worked. Claire didn't know what she was doing. No, she didn't. Vivian said it without softness, just as a fact. That's what makes her useful to him. A knowing asset has tells. Claire has none because she was operating on emotion the entire time. Kane is meticulous. He picked her specifically because she's... She stopped. "Because she's what?" Damien asked, and his voice had an edge in it that told her he already knew the answer and didn't want to say it himself. "Because she loves easily and doesn't ask the right questions. That's not an insult. That's a profile. And Kane built a 7-month operation around it." Damien looked at the window. The Christmas lights on the porch were still on from last night, running off the timer she'd set years ago. They looked absurd in the gray morning light. He looked at them for a moment like they offended him personally, and then he looked back at her. "And you," he said. "What's your role in this? What are you proposing?" "Let me get close to him." The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man controlling a very strong first reaction. "No," he said. "Damien, no." Flat, final. The word landed like a door being shut. "Listen to me. You can't send anyone from inside the organization without tipping him. You can't move against him openly without a war. But I can move. I'm not on his radar the same way. He thinks he's already neutralized me." "Neutralized you?" "Through Claire, through this." She gestured at the space between them, the room, the whole ruined morning. "He thinks what happened last night either broke me or drove me out. He thinks I'm a liability you're now managing. That's his miscalculation." Damien stared at her. She had been the subject of his stare for 15 years, and she knew the grades of it, the calculating one, the warm one that he rationed like it cost him something, the cold one he used on people who were about to find out they'd made a mistake. This one was different. This one had something underneath it she couldn't immediately classify. "You're telling me you want to walk into Kane's orbit," he said slowly, "while I sit here and do nothing. I'm telling you that if you move before I have everything, we lose the evidence and we lose the names, every person he's turned, every arrangement he's made outside the organization. If this goes wrong and you can't prove what he did, you won't just lose him. You'll lose the people who are watching to see who comes out of this clean." He said nothing. "The families meet in 3 weeks," she said. "New Year's Eve. The Calloran dinner." His eyes sharpened. "You know about that." "I've known about it for 2 months." I know Marchetti is coming from the coast. I know the CO brothers will be there. I know it's the first time since the Chicago agreement that every senior figure will be in the same room. She paused. I also know that if someone wanted to make a move, a real move, the kind that reshapes everything, that room is where you'd do it. That's the room where you'd announce that Damian Cross is no longer a power worth fearing. He went very still. She pressed forward. Kane is building toward that night. Whatever he's going to do, it ends there. Which means I have 3 weeks. 3 weeks to find out who he's turned, what he's promised them, and how he plans to run it. And then we take it apart piece by piece before he ever gets to say a word in that room. Damian picked up his coffee cup, set it down again, walked to the window. She watched his back and let him have the silence because she knew better than to push him when he was processing. If you go near Kane and something goes wrong, he said, without turning, I will not be able to protect you without showing my hand. I know that. That's not a comfortable thing for me. I know that too. He turned. His face had resolved into something, not agreement, not yet, but the specific look of a man who recognized he had fewer options than he wanted. How do you plan to get close to him? He asked. Through the one person he's already comfortable with. She said it clearly. I'm going to talk to Claire. She found her sister at a hotel 12 miles from the mountain house. She'd guessed based on the 3 options within reasonable distance and got the right one on the second call, which told her Claire hadn't gone far and hadn't thought clearly about where to go. That tracked. Claire never thought clearly about where to go when things fell apart. She defaulted to close, to familiar, to the radius she knew. Room 214. Vivian knocked, waited, knocked again. The door opened on the chain first. One eye, red-rimmed and wide, looked through the gap. I told you I'd call, Claire said. You told me you'd write things down, Vivian said. That's not the same as calling. Open the door. A pause. The chain came off. The room was standard. 2 beds, 1 unmade, the television on low with a morning news program that neither of them was watching. Claire had been crying recently enough that her face still had the specific raw look of someone who'd only just stopped. She was wearing yesterday's silver dress with a hotel blanket pulled around her shoulders. She looked 22, not 29. She looked like the girl Vivian used to drive to school when their mother was working early shifts. Vivian came in and sat down in the single chair by the window. Did you write anything down? She asked. Claire picked up her phone from the nightstand, held it out. Vivian took it and scrolled. It was more than she'd expected. Not because Claire was thorough by nature, but because the memories were clearly painful enough to have come out in detail. 3 pages of notes, timestamps, fragments of conversations, specific phrases Kane had used. Vivian read it twice, slowly. He told you Damian was losing ground, she said. He said the organization was under stress, that Damian was making decisions that were scaring people inside the operation. He said, Claire pulled the blanket tighter. He said Damian might do something reckless, and I should make sure you weren't isolated when it happened. He was positioning himself as the stable option, the reasonable one. He was kind to me. Claire's voice was defensive and aware of itself at the same time. I know how that sounds. I know you're going to tell me. I'm not going to tell you anything about that right now. Vivian kept her voice clean of judgment. She couldn't afford judgment right now, not if she needed Claire functional. I need to ask you something, and I need a real answer. Did Kane ever ask you to take anything from the house? Documents, files, anything physical? Claire's expression shifted. Something crossed it that wasn't quite guilt, more like the sick recognition of something you hadn't understood at the time. He asked me to photograph the study, she said quietly. He said it was because he wanted to know if Damian was keeping correspondence separate from the office. He said he was trying to protect himself from a paper trail that might implicate him if Damian did something that brought in outside scrutiny. Vivian held still. Did you? A long pause. Once. About 4 months ago. I used my phone. I didn't take anything, just pictures. Of what specifically? The desk, the filing cabinet. There was a binder on the shelf. I got a picture of the cover. She swallowed. He was very calm about it, like it was nothing, like I was doing him a small favor. Vivian handed the phone back. She looked at her sister for a long moment. Claire met her eyes and then looked away, which was the most honest thing she'd done since Vivian walked in. He used you for access, Vivian said. The relationship with Damien was secondary. Maybe it was to keep you compliant, maybe it was to ensure you stayed in proximity. But the primary objective was always access. You need to understand that clearly, because everything I'm about to ask you to do depends on you understanding it. Claire looked back at her. Her jaw was set in the way Vivian recognized from childhood, the look that meant she was deciding whether to fall apart or hold together. What are you asking me to do? I'm going to tell you what to say to him, and you're going to say it exactly without improvising. And then you're going to let me know everything he says back. The silence in the room was heavy and particular. You want me to spy on him, Claire said. I want you to correct a mistake, Vivian said. Those are different things. One is about me, the other is about you. She was back in the city by 4 that afternoon. The apartment that she and Damien kept in the city was on the 14th floor of a building that Damien's organization technically owned through 6 degrees of legal separation. She'd always found that slightly funny and slightly grim in equal measure. She went up, unlocked the door, and stood in the entryway for a moment before she moved through the rooms. She was looking for anything that felt recently disturbed. Nothing obvious, nothing that would announce itself, just the particular wrongness of a space that someone else had occupied. She found it in the study. The binder on the 3rd shelf, the one Claire had photographed, had been moved. Not much. Half an inch off its position, maybe? The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd stood in that room enough times to know exactly where everything rested. She didn't touch it. She stood there and looked at it. Someone had been in the apartment. Not recently. The dust on the shelf had resettled, but within the last few months. Which meant Kane had the photographs from Claire and had sent someone to confirm or expand on them. Which meant the apartment had been compromised for longer than Vivian had suspected, and anything Damien kept here that was sensitive had potentially been seen. She thought about that binder. She went to it, opened it with gloved hands she'd found in her coat pocket, a reflex she'd developed years ago for reasons she'd never explained to anyone. Inside were property documents, lease agreements for 3 warehouses, and routing numbers for 2 accounts she recognized as connected to the legitimate side of the operation's holding structure. Standard enough. Damning enough. In the right hands. She photographed every page on her own phone. Then she closed the binder, replaced it in its exact position, and walked out of the study. She needed to understand what Kane had already extracted. Because a man building toward a New Year's Eve move in a room full of crime family representatives needed more than information. He needed leverage. He needed to be able to stand up in that room and offer something, proof of Damien's vulnerabilities, evidence of overreach, the kind of documented exposure that would make powerful men calculate that backing Kane was safer than staying loyal to Cross. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. 40 minutes later, she had located, through 3 different access points she was not supposed to know about, a pattern of wire transfers that didn't belong to any account she recognized in Damien's structure. Small amounts, moving laterally through holding companies, not up through the hierarchy the way money was supposed to move. 12 transfers over 4 months. 12 different destination points. Kane was building a war chest. Not a large one. This wasn't about flooding the operation with outside money. This was about having something clean, untraceable. The kind of funds you need when you're about to do something that burns your existing relationships and you need a foundation to rebuild from. She stared at the transfer records. She thought about what it meant for someone with Kane's access to have a clean pool of money sitting outside the organization's reach. It meant he was serious. It meant this wasn't ambition without infrastructure. He had thought about what came after. He had planned for the aftermath, which was the thing that most people who attempted power grabs didn't do. They planned the moment. They didn't plan the morning after. Kane had planned the morning after. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of the kitchen for a while. The city was audible at low volume through the windows, traffic, a distant siren, the ambient hum of 15 floors of other people's lives stacked beneath her. She thought about Damien, about the look on his face this morning when she'd laid out what she knew. Not the controlled, handled look he showed most people. Something beneath that. Something that in anyone else she would have called fear, but in Damien translated as a kind of acute recognition. The look of a man who has just realized the ground under him is less solid than it appeared. She had seen that look exactly once before. At the hospital, 3 years ago, when the doctor had come in and said the words that ended their 3rd pregnancy. Damien had stood up from the chair and walked to the window and stood there, and his back was the back of a man who had met something he couldn't negotiate with. She did not know, even now, whether she still loved him. The question felt too large and too dangerous to approach directly, like a room you can see into but can't enter without moving something that might collapse the ceiling. What she knew was simpler. She was not going to let him be destroyed by a man who had spent 7 months using her family like a toolkit. That was not love exactly, but it was something with teeth. Kane called her the next morning. She'd been expecting contact, had told Claire to let him know, in the most carefully calibrated way, that Vivian had taken the news badly and was pulling away from Damien, that she was, in Claire's tentative and believable phrasing, not in a good place. She answered on the second ring, kept her voice tight, controlled in the way of someone holding something together poorly. Vivian. His voice was warm. That was the thing she'd always registered about Kane without ever quite examining. He had a warmth that felt genuine right up to the moment you looked at what was underneath it. I heard about what happened. I'm sorry. I know that's inadequate. Did you know? She asked. She let her voice have a tremor in it, not large, just enough. A brief pause. Calibrated. About Damien and Claire? I had suspicions. I didn't want to bring it to you without being certain. I didn't want to be the one to... He stopped. I'm sorry I wasn't more direct with you sooner. She let the silence run for a beat. I don't know what to do, she said. I don't know where to go from here. You don't have to know right now. He said it gently. This is not something you process in a day, and you don't have to process it alone. There it was. The opening. The exact move she'd anticipated. Position himself as the compassionate alternative. The man who saw her clearly when her husband didn't. She let her voice break slightly. I've been trying to figure out whether any of it was real. Any of it. And I can't tell anymore what was true. He's not a man who knows how to be honest with people he loves, Kane said. I've watched him for 11 years. I know that better than most. She let that land, let herself sound moved by it. Is that why you've been... She stopped herself, restarted. Have you been worried about me? Is that why you had Claire... I was worried about you, he said, and the way he said it was almost perfect. The right weight, the right pause before and after. A person who didn't have 6 pages of notes on his methodology would have believed it completely. Whatever else, your well-being matters to me. I don't know who to trust right now, she said. Damien is... I can't talk to him the way I used to. Everything feels transactional, like he's managing me. That's because he is, Kane said. He does that with everyone. It's not personal, which somehow makes it worse. I think I need someone I can actually talk to, she said. Someone who isn't going to report back to him. Another pause. This one had a different quality. This was the pause of a man who is getting exactly what he wanted and is deciding how quickly to take it. Then talk to me, he said. She met him 4 days later. The restaurant was his choice, a quiet place in the east side, the kind of room that had good sight lines and multiple exits, which told her he was either habitually cautious or specifically cautious about this particular meeting. She guessed both. She arrived 7 minutes after the time he'd given her, which was enough to be slightly late without being rude, and she dressed in the way a woman dresses when she wants to look like she hasn't thought carefully about what she's wearing. He was already there. He stood when she came in. A small, deliberate gesture, the kind that men who understand power perform for women they want to seem harmless to. He looked exactly as she remembered, 41, lean, a face that was angular in the kind of way that photographed well and aged carefully. His suits were always better than they needed to be. His shoes were always exactly right. She sat down across from him and looked at him directly, which she knew made some people uncomfortable and Kane comfortable because he was a man who believed in his own legibility. You look better than I expected, he said. I'm good at looking okay, she said. He smiled. It reached his eyes, which was impressive. Damien doesn't know you're here. I didn't tell him. She picked up the water glass. I didn't know I was going to come until this morning. I'm glad you did. She studied him across the table. He let her do it. He was pouring something into a glass, wine, a Bordeaux she noted without commenting, and his hands were steady and unhurried. Tell me something honestly, she said. I'll try. How bad is it? The organization. The position he's in. She kept her eyes on him. I've been living inside this world for 15 years, and I've never been afraid of it, but lately I feel like the ground is moving and no one is telling me why. He set down the bottle, looked at her. The ground is moving, he said. That's accurate. Is Damien the reason? Damien is part of the reason. He was careful with it, not giving her everything, still testing how much she wanted. There are concerns among the people who matter, about judgment, about the direction things have been going. What kind of concerns? The kind that don't get aired openly. He looked at her evenly. Because no one wants to be the first one to say something while he's still the one holding the structure together. And if he wasn't? Silence. She let it breathe. That's a significant question, he said. I'm in a significant position, she said. I've been the woman behind that structure for 15 years. I know where things are. I know what's been done and how. And right now I'm sitting in a restaurant with a man who I'm starting to think knows more than he's been saying. She paused. So I'm asking, if the ground shifted, if things changed, would there be a place for someone who knew everything I know? He was very still for a moment. Then he reached across the table, not quite touching her hand, close enough to make the gesture legible. There would absolutely be a place for you, he said. She looked at his hand, looked at his face. She nodded slowly, as if that was what she needed to hear. She'd debriefed Damien that night. Not at the apartment. She didn't trust the apartment anymore. She met him at a location he chose, a building in the garment district, second floor, a room that hadn't been used in 3 months and had been swept that afternoon. He had 2 of his men outside and 1 on the roof. And she didn't ask about any of them because they weren't the conversation. He listened to everything. He did not interrupt once. That was one of the things she had always respected about him, the quality of his listening, the way he held information without visibly reacting, turning it slowly in his mind. When she finished, he was quiet for almost 30 seconds. He offered you a position, he said. He implied one. And you implied you might want it. Yes. He looked at her. The room was cold. The heat was on, but inadequate, and she could feel it across her shoulders. He looked at her with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite hurt, and was something more complicated than either. Is that all it was? He asked. Implied? She met his eyes. What are you actually asking me? I'm asking whether the conversation you just described is one where you were performing something, or one where part of you meant it. The question sat between them in the cold room. She did not look away. I meant the part where I said the ground was moving. I meant the part where I said I didn't know who to trust. She let that sit. But I'm here. That should tell you something. His jaw tightened. He looked away first, just barely, just for a second, and then he was back and the controlled surface had returned. What does he want from you? Information, access. The same thing he wanted from Claire, except from someone who actually knows where everything is. She crossed her arms against the cold. He's going to ask me to deliver something before the New Year's Eve dinner, proof that I've turned, something concrete. He won't commit to me fully until he has a test. And you'll give him something. I'll give him something that looks like everything and tells him nothing he can use. She watched his face. But I need you to trust me, completely. I need to know that whatever I give him, whatever story I build around it, you know that it's a construct. Because if you react to it, if you move against something I've handed him as false bait, I understand, he said. Do you? Vivian. His voice. Her name in his voice, which had its own specific quality that she had catalogued over 15 years without meaning to. I understand. She nodded. She started for the door. There's something else, he said. She stopped. The men Kane has turned. He said it carefully. I've been running my own assessment since we spoke. I have 3 names that I'm almost certain about. 2 more I'm watching. She turned back. Who? He told her. She filed the names in the part of her memory that was becoming a map. Kane at the center, radiating outward in spokes of trust and money and leverage and fear. Don't move on any of them, she said. I know. Damien, I need them where they are. I need Kane to believe he has 5 loyal men inside your structure for 3 more weeks. The moment you pull one of them, he recalculates everything. I know, he said again, with the particular flatness of a man agreeing to something that cost him. She looked at him across the cold room. She thought briefly and without meaning to about the ultrasound image. 11 weeks, now 12. The small fact growing quietly inside her that had nothing to do with any of this and everything to do with why she couldn't walk away. She turned and walked to the door. She put her hand on it. Vivian. She waited. Be careful, he said. She didn't turn around. I always am. She wasn't sure in that moment whether she was lying. Kane called again on the 28th. This time his voice had a different quality. Still warm, but underneath the warmth, something with an edge. He was moving forward. She could feel the timeline tightening in the rhythm of his speech. I need you to do something for me, he said. Before we go any further, I need to know that I can rely on you. What kind of something? There's a meeting on the 30th. Damien will be there with 3 of his financial people. I need to know who the third person is. He's been kept out of the documentation we have, and I can't identify him through the usual channels. She took her time. Let him hear her thinking about it. If I find that out, and I give it to you, then I know you're serious, he said. Then we can have a real conversation about what comes next. She pressed the phone lightly against her cheek. She thought about the name he was asking for. She thought about what she could build around it. A name that was real enough to be verifiable, connected enough to seem significant, but positioned in a way that sent Kane's attention somewhere that cost him time without giving him anything he could weaponize. Give me until tomorrow morning, she said. I can do that. She hung up, stood at the window of the apartment with the city below her and her reflection faint in the glass. She had until New Year's Eve. 3 weeks had become 12 days. The acceleration meant Kane was confident. Confidence in men like that was usually the thing that got them. But she had to be exact. Not just good. Exact. Because this was the step that committed her. Once she handed him that name, once he verified it and used it, she was embedded too deeply to pull back without it becoming something dangerous. She would be past this point of being simply Damien Cross's wife, who had gone to dinner with his lieutenant. She would be inside the architecture of Kane's plan. And once you were inside something like that, the only way out was through. She thought about that for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person outside this entire situation who she trusted with the specific kind of thing she needed right now. A name, a position, a piece of the truth that was the right shape and the wrong substance. The phone rang 3 times. I need you to build me a ghost, she said when it answered. The ghost took 48 hours to build. The man Vivian called was named Reuben Trace, not his real name, which she had never known, and which didn't matter because the name was the only thing about him that wasn't real. He was 63. He lived in a brownstone in a neighborhood that had gone through 3 different identities since he moved in, and he was the kind of person who existed in Damien's world the way load-bearing walls exist in old buildings, invisible, essential, and catastrophic to remove without understanding what they're holding up. He built paper people. Identities that could survive a moderate level of scrutiny, the kind that a man running an internal coup might apply when a source hands him a name. She told him what she needed. He asked 3 questions, none of them about why. That was why she'd used him before and why she was using him now. The ghost's name was a man called Gerald Poole, financial compliance background, currently operating as a third-party auditor attached to 2 of Damien's legitimate holding companies. Real enough to exist on 2 databases that Kane's people would think to check. Connected enough to the meeting on the 30th to be plausible as the unnamed third financial contact. And positioned specifically in a way that would send Kane's verification efforts toward the legitimate side of the operation. The side that was insulated, clean, and incapable of giving him anything that moved his plan forward. She gave Kane the name on the morning of the 29th. He verified it in 6 hours. She knew he'd verified it because he called back with a different quality of warmth. The warmth of a man who has just confirmed that the thing he hoped was true actually is. He didn't say, I checked your story. He didn't need to. He just said, thank you, I mean that, in a way that meant something else entirely. What comes next? She asked. New Year's Eve, he said. The Caloran dinner. I want you there. I'm not on the guest list. You will be. A pause. As my guest, not Cross's wife, mine. Another pause, smaller. If you're willing. She made herself take 2 full seconds before answering, made herself sound like a woman arriving at a decision she'd been circling for days. Yes, she said. I'm willing. She hung up and sat with her hands flat on the kitchen counter and breathed for a minute. Then she called Damien. He didn't like it. That was the first thing. The silence on his end had a specific density to it, the density of a man who is running calculations and not enjoying any of the results. He wants you there as his, he said, as a visible demonstration that he has something you don't, she said. That's what it means in that room. He's not interested in me. He's interested in what walking in with me signals to every other man in that room. I know what it signals. Damien. I know, he said. Harder this time. I know what it is. I don't have to like it. No, you don't have to like it. She kept her voice level. But I need you to understand that the moment I walk into that room with him is the moment he thinks he's already won. And that's the moment when everything he's built is the most exposed. He'll be looking outward, at Marchetti, at the Seo brothers, at the reaction in the room. He won't be watching the details. What details? Claire will be there. She said it carefully. He'll have her there as another demonstration, another piece of what he thinks he's taken from you. I need you to let me handle how that plays out. A very long pause. You've talked to her more than you've told me. It wasn't a question. She didn't treat it like one. I've told you everything you need to make the right decisions. There are things I haven't told you because they're not relevant to your decisions. Those are different categories. He said nothing. Do you trust me? She asked. The pause that followed was the longest of any of their conversations since Christmas morning. She counted it without meaning to. 7 seconds. Yes, he said. She released a breath she hadn't fully acknowledged she was holding. Then let me finish this. I'm close. I have the shape of what he's planning for that room, and I need 4 more days to confirm the last piece. Once I have it, you'll have everything. The names, the money trail, the arrangement he's made with at least one person in that room who isn't supposed to be his. Who? I think it's Marchetti. Another silence. Damien and Marchetti had a history that went back 20 years and had 2 specific incidents in it that Vivian only half knew about. She'd heard the edges of them, never the centers. But she knew that Marchetti was a man who calculated his loyalties in terms of positioning rather than principle, and she knew that Kane was smart enough to have identified that. If Marchetti is with him, Damien said, then Kane doesn't need the room. He just needs Marchetti to stand up first. I know. That's why I need the confirmation before the 30th. He was quiet for a moment. Then, how do you plan to get it? The same way I got everything else, she said. I let Kane tell me himself. She met Kane again on the 30th. Not at the restaurant this time. He had an office, legitimate on paper, a consulting firm on the 11th floor of a building in Midtown that had real employees doing real work on the floors below, which was a level of operational discipline she found herself respecting despite everything. He met her in the elevator lobby, walked her in himself, closed the door. The office had a view. She noticed that about people, whether they put themselves facing windows or with their backs to them. Kane faced the window. He wanted to be seen against the city, wanted the skyline as a backdrop. She filed that away. Sit down, he said, and gestured to the chair across from his desk, not the sofa arrangement at the side of the room, desk and chair. The configuration of an interview. She sat. She crossed her legs, set her bag on the floor, and looked at him with the specific expression she'd been cultivating for 2 weeks, somewhere between cautious and ready. The expression of a woman who has made a decision and is still getting used to the weight of it. I want to talk about the evening itself, he said. I want you to understand what you're walking into, not just as my guest. I want you to understand what the room is going to look like by the end of the night. Tell me. He leaned back. He had the ease of a man who has rehearsed something enough times that it no longer feels like rehearsal, just fluency. The Caloran dinner is where it ends for Damien. Not violently. I want to be clear about that. I'm not running a war. I'm running a transition. What happens in that room is that the people who matter hear a coherent case for why the current structure is a liability. The financials, the exposure, the pattern of decisions over the past 18 months that have put the organization in a position it doesn't need to be in. He watched her. And they hear it from someone they trust. Marchetti, she said. He didn't react. He absorbed it. What makes you say that? Because you wouldn't make a move in that room unless you had someone in the room already. Someone whose standing exceeds yours. Someone who can speak first. She held his gaze. Marchetti's been angling for a structural realignment for 2 years. Everyone knows it. You gave him the justification he needed. Kane looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled, just slightly, just at one side. You're very good at this, he said. I've been watching it my whole adult life, she said. Does it bother you that I went to him? It tells me you're serious, which is what I needed to know. She let a beat pass. What do you need from me that night? Your presence, he said. Your composure. And one thing before we get there. He opened a drawer, slid a slim envelope across the desk. I need you to deliver that to the apartment before the evening, to the study. There's a specific location inside. The instructions are on the inside flap. What is it? A device, he said. Small. It records and transmits. We need anything Cross discusses in that room in the 48 hours before the dinner. It's insurance. She picked up the envelope, felt the weight of it. Something the size of a large coin, maybe two. You want me to plant a listening device in my husband's study. I want you to make sure that whatever he knows about what's coming, I know first, so I can adjust. He said it evenly. It's not complicated. She looked at the envelope in her hand. This was the test. She had known a test was coming, had known it would be something like this, something that committed her past the point of deniability. He needed her to do something that couldn't be undone, something that would make her complicit in a way that she couldn't walk back from if things went wrong. She looked up at him. All right, she said. He held her gaze. You don't hesitate. I told you, I'm done hesitating. She put the envelope in her bag. She stood up. He stood too, came around the desk, and she understood she was being walked to the door in the way that powerful men walk people to the door when they want to seem magnanimous about it. He put his hand briefly on her shoulder, just the shoulder, just for a second. 4 days, he said, and then everything changes. She nodded. She walked out. She took the elevator down alone and stood in it with her hand pressed flat against the envelope through the leather of her bag, and thought very precisely about what had just been handed to her and what it meant. She didn't go to the apartment. She went to Damien. Same garment district building, same cold second-floor room, same 2 men outside. She handed him the envelope across the table without preamble. He opened it, examined the device inside, turned it over twice, and handed it to the man who had been standing quietly in the corner for reasons she now understood. Transmitter, the man said. Commercial grade. Not custom. Probably purchased through a third party. Damien nodded. The man left the room. Damien looked at Vivian. He asked you to plant it, he said. Yes. In our study? Yes. He set the envelope down on the table between them. We can use it, he said. Feed him something through it. Control what he hears before the 30th. That was my first thought. She sat down. But I want to walk through it carefully because if he has anything else in that apartment that we haven't found, he'll be cross-referencing what comes through the transmitter against whatever else he's getting. We can't just... We swept the apartment yesterday, Damien said. My people. Thorough. She looked at him. When? While you were meeting him. I wasn't going to wait. He said it without apology. We found one more device, a phone line splice in the hallway. Old installation. It's been there at minimum 3 months. 3 months. While she'd been sitting in that apartment working through her research. While she'd been making calls she'd thought were private. What calls went through it, she asked. We're still pulling them, but... He stopped. The pause was wrong. The specific quality of it was wrong. She straightened. What? He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd seen twice in their marriage, and had never wanted to see again. The expression that preceded information that was going to change the shape of something. One of the calls pulled from the splice, he said. It was to a clinic, a medical billing follow-up. He paused. 12 weeks ago. The room went very quiet. She said nothing. The billing reference was for an obstetric consultation, he said. He was watching her face. He was doing it with the same careful attention he gave to everything that mattered, which was both the thing she loved about him and in this moment, the thing that felt like being taken apart. She breathed in slowly through her nose, out through her mouth. Vivian, he said, don't. She held up one hand, one finger of space between them. You're pregnant. She closed her eyes for a second, 1 second. Then she opened them and looked at him directly. 13 weeks now, she said. The sound he made was not a word. It was something below language, something that came from a place she had never reached in 15 years, and 2 lines on a test on Christmas Eve. He put one hand on the table and leaned on it and looked at the floor. She watched him. She watched the controlled surface he maintained for everything come apart very slightly at the seams, the way expensive fabric eventually shows stress at the points that bear the most weight. She watched him breathe. "You were going to tell me," he said, "at the mountain house." "Yes." "Before you found—" "Yes." He straightened. He looked at her, and his face had something in it she hadn't planned for, hadn't accounted for in any of her calculations, because she'd spent 13 weeks accounting for her own feelings about this child, and had somehow failed to fully model what it would look like on his face when he found out. "This is why," he said. "The whole thing. This is why you didn't leave." She held his gaze. "This is one reason." "Don't do that." His voice was rough. "Don't make it smaller than it is." "I'm not making it smaller. I'm telling you it's not the only reason." She stood up. Her legs were steadier than she expected. "I would have gone back to that house regardless. I was already going back when I found the plate on the coupe. The baby—" She stopped, started again. "The baby means I need this to be finished correctly. Not just finished, correctly. Because I'm not raising a child inside a structure that Cain has compromised. I'm not doing that." He stared at her. Something moved through his face, something she couldn't name precisely and didn't try to. "You should have told me," he said. "I know." She didn't flinch from it. "I needed it to be mine for a while. I needed to know it was real before I made it part of this." He said nothing for a long time. Then he crossed the room and stood in front of her, and she held herself very still. He put his hand against the side of her face. One hand, palm flat, the way he had touched her in the early years when he still let himself do that without calculation. She held herself still and let him do it. "All right," he said, very quietly. She nodded. He dropped his hand. He turned back to the table and the envelope and the problem in front of them. She watched him reassemble himself from the outside in, the way she'd watched him do it 100 times, and she did the same. "We put the device in the study," she said. "We feed it something. I need to decide what Cain hears in those 48 hours. Something that confirms his timeline," he said. He was back. She could hear it in the quality of his voice. "Something that tells him Damien Cross doesn't know what's coming." "Yes." "And something that tells him Marchetti is secure. He'll be worried about Marchetti right up until the evening. If the transmitter gives him confidence that Marchetti is going in clean, he relaxes. A relaxed man makes different decisions in a room full of people." "Worse decisions," Damien said, more visible ones. She picked up her bag. "I'll handle what goes through the transmitter. I need you to stay out of the study for the next 3 days. Let your schedule run exactly as normal. If any of the 5 men you identified are watching your movements, nothing can change." He nodded. She was almost at the door when he spoke again. "A boy or a girl?" he asked. She stopped. She hadn't meant to smile. It happened anyway. A small, involuntary thing. "I don't know yet," she said. She left. The next 36 hours were the most careful of her life. She returned to the apartment and placed the device exactly where Cain's instructions specified, behind the 3rd shelf bracket in the study, angled toward the desk. She did it with the deliberation of someone handling something that would detonate if she wasn't precise. Then she went to the kitchen, made tea she didn't drink, and spent 3 hours planning what the device was going to hear. She wrote out the conversations in longhand. Not the device itself, a pad of paper, her own shorthand, working through the structure of what 2 people discussing Damien Cross's unaware approach to New Year's Eve would actually sound like. She needed it to be natural, not scripted. She needed it to have the specific texture of a conversation that didn't know it was being recorded, which meant wrong turns, interruptions, the occasional silence that didn't serve a narrative purpose. She recruited Marcy Aldrin for the second voice. Marcy, who had been Vivian's resource for years and who owed nothing to Cain, and understood precisely enough of the situation to play her role correctly without needing the full picture. She briefed her in 30 minutes. Marcy asked 2 questions, both of them practical. They ran the conversations over the course of 2 evenings. Natural gaps. The sound of the apartment, the elevator in the building, traffic 14 floors below, the refrigerator's mechanical cycling, all present in the background the way ambient sound is present in a real recording and absent in a manufactured one. What the transmitter fed Vincent Cain, Damian Cross unconcerned. Damian Cross discussing the Caloran dinner as a routine engagement. Damian Cross directing Marcy, who played the role of a logistics coordinator, to prepare his attendance as a standard annual event, no special security arrangement, no altered guest list. Damian Cross, who did not know, and whose wife had not told him, and whose lieutenant had not been found out. And carefully embedded one additional element, a conversation between Vivian and Marcy about Marchetti. Natural sounding, briefly mentioned, Vivian saying she'd spoken to him at a prior event and found him warm. Marcy agreeing that Marchetti had always been cordial. The implication, unstated, that Marchetti's alignment to Damian remained solid, that the worry Kane might have about his key player breaking ranks was unfounded. She tested the playback twice. She listened to it the way Kane would listen to it, looking for the false note, the place where something was too smooth, too on the nose. She found one and redid that section of the conversation until the false note was gone. On the second night, she turned off the lights in the study and sat in the dark for a while. She thought about Marchetti. She still didn't have the confirmation she needed on his arrangement with Kane. She had the logic, the inference, the accumulated weight of circumstantial evidence. But she didn't have the direct proof. And if she was wrong about Marchetti, if Kane's key ally in that room was someone else entirely, then everything she'd built around the Caloran dinner being the moment of exposure had a critical gap in it. She needed to know for certain. She reached for her phone. She called Claire at 11 at night, which Claire would have taken as a significant gesture at any point in their relationship, but now took as something else. The particular weight of a call that comes when the usual rules have been suspended. "How often does Kane contact you?" Vivian asked. "He calls every few days." A pause. "He called this morning." "What did he say?" "He wanted to know if I was coming to the Caloran dinner. He said—" Claire stopped. Vivian could hear her choosing words. "He said it would be better if I was there, that it would mean something to have me there." She felt it click into place. Not Marchetti as the visible validation. Claire, her sister, visible in that room, standing near Kane. The proof of concept. The living demonstration that he had reached inside Damian Cross's closest circle and turned it toward himself. A wife's sister was more legible to that room than a financial document. People in that world understood betrayal better than spreadsheets. "He's going to use you as a symbol," Vivian said. "Not a person, a symbol, the way you use a flag to claim ground." Silence. "Claire," Vivian kept her voice even, "I need you to understand what the room is going to be like on New Year's Eve. I need you to understand who those people are. Not in the abstract, specifically." "I know what they are," Claire said. "I'm not stupid. I know you're not. So understand that when Kane walks you into that room, he is not protecting you. He is displaying you. And when the display is over, when what he needs from it is done, you become a liability." The silence on the other end had a different quality now. "What does that mean?" Claire asked. Her voice was smaller. "It means that after that night, you become someone who knows things. About Kane's plan. About what he did. About what he arranged." Vivian paused. "In that world, people who know things and don't have protection become a problem." She heard Claire breathing. "I'm giving you the chance to not be in that room," Vivian said. "I'm giving you the chance to be somewhere else on New Year's Eve with people who can make sure you're accounted for." "In exchange for what?" "In exchange for telling me one thing, one specific thing. When Kane told you about the dinner, the Caloran dinner specifically, did he mention who was organizing the internal support? Did he name anyone else who was part of what he was building?" A long, long pause. "He mentioned a name once," Claire said quietly. "About 6 weeks ago. He said it like he was thinking out loud, like he didn't mean to say it in front of me, and then he moved on very quickly." "What name?" "Caloran," Claire said. "Not the host, a different one. James Caloran, the son." Vivian sat very still. James Caloran, 34 years old, managed the family's East Coast distribution arrangement, had been, until 2 years ago, closely aligned with Damian's organization before his father decided the formal arrangement had run its utility. Had reason to want the power structure to shift. Had the standing, the family name, and the access to open doors that Marchetti alone couldn't open. Not Marchetti. Caloran's own son. The dinner was being hosted by the family of the man Kane had turned. The dinner was a trap. She'd known it was a planned moment. had known Kane was engineering the room. But she'd been thinking of it as a declaration, Kane walking in and announcing the shift, using the gathered power as witness. She'd been thinking of it as theater. It wasn't theater. The dinner itself was the mechanism, hosted by the Callorans. James Calloran inside Kane's arrangement. The building, the staff, the room, all of it controlled by a family that had already switched sides. Whatever happened in that room on New Year's Eve was not going to be a public negotiation. Damien Cross was walking into a room that had been fully prepared for him to not walk out of. She stood up from the chair so fast she knocked it back. "Claire," she said, "where are you right now?" "My apartment. Leave. Tonight. Go to the address I'm going to text you. Don't tell Kane. Don't tell anyone. Just go." She was already moving, already across the apartment, already looking for her coat. "Can you do that?" "Vivian, what's happening? I'll explain everything when you're somewhere safe. Go now." She hung up and was already calling Damien when she remembered that the phone in the apartment might still have exposure through the splice, even if the physical device had been removed. She disconnected the call. She grabbed her bag. She went for the door. She was 3 steps into the hallway when the elevator opened. 2 men she didn't recognize stepped out. They were dressed correctly. The suits, the shoes, the deliberate absence of anything that would draw attention. They were dressed the way men dress in that world when they want to look like they belong in a building and not like what they actually are. They looked at her. She looked at them. One of them said, "Mrs. Cross, Mr. Kane would like to speak with you." She held very still. Her bag was on her shoulder. Her phone was in her coat pocket. The stairwell door was 12 feet to her left, and the elevator behind them was still open. She calculated it in the 2 seconds she had. 12 feet was too far. She said, "Of course." She kept her voice completely level. "Let me get my keys." She turned back toward the apartment door. Her hand went into her bag. She had the keys in her fingers and her thumb on the emergency contact she'd programmed 3 weeks ago when she first understood that this was the kind of situation that could develop into this kind of situation. She pressed it once. It sent a single pre-written text to a single number. Then she turned around, keys in hand, expression composed, and walked toward the 2 men in the open elevator. She had no way to know if the text had gone through. She had no way to know if Damien was positioned to receive it. She had 4 floors of elevator ride, and whatever came after to figure out how to keep herself intact until someone who knew where she was could do something about it. And the child she was carrying was 13 weeks old and entirely unaware of any of this, which was the thought she used to hold herself together as the elevator doors closed, and the 2 men stood on either side of her and the floor numbers began to descend. The elevator took 41 seconds to reach the lobby. She counted them. Not because counting helped. It didn't. It was just the thing her brain did when it needed to be doing something that wasn't panic. The 2 men stood on either side of her with exactly the right amount of space between them, close enough to matter, far enough to look like nothing if anyone glanced at the lobby camera. The one on her left had his hands clasped in front of him. The one on her right kept his right hand at his side, slightly away from his body, which was the specific posture of a man who wanted fast access to something on his hip. She kept her breathing even. She kept her face composed. She kept her thumb pressed against the inside of her bag where the phone was, feeling for the screen, counting back in her mind to confirm the text had sent before she'd put it away. 1 press. Pre-written. Sent to Damien's secondary number, the one that wasn't routed through any line Kane's people had touched. The text said 4 words. 14. Moving. Don't call. 14 was the floor. Moving meant she was leaving it. Don't call meant exactly that. A call would announce to whoever was with her that someone knew, and that was the one thing she couldn't afford yet. The lobby doors opened. A black car was at the curb. Not a car she recognized. The driver didn't turn around when they got in. "Where are we going?" she asked. The man on her left said, "Mr. Kane wants to meet in person." He could have called. He felt it was better this way. She looked out the window. They were heading east. She filed the direction, filed the street, filed the fact that they'd taken a route that avoided the building's standard camera sightlines, which meant someone had done advance work on this building at some point, and she hadn't known it. She thought about the transmitter in the study. She thought about whether Kane had been hearing something through it that she hadn't intended, whether there was a gap in what she'd controlled, something she'd missed. She went back through it methodically, scene by scene, the way you retrace a path when you're trying to find where you dropped something. She didn't find the gap. which meant either the transmitter was performing as she'd designed, or Kane had a second source she hadn't identified, or he had simply run out of patience with the careful approach and was accelerating the timeline for a reason she didn't yet know. The car stopped in front of a building she recognized, the East Side office, his consulting firm. 11 floors. She'd been here 2 days ago. The difference tonight was that the lobby was empty in a way. Lobbies aren't empty when a building is just closed for the evening. The emptiness had been arranged. The security desk was unmanned. The elevator was already open and waiting. She got in. The 2 men came with her. 11th floor. Kane was standing at his desk when the door opened. He was not behind it. He was in front of it, which was a deliberate choice, a posture that said this is not a formal meeting while simultaneously being a formal meeting. He was in a different suit than she'd seen him in before. Dark. He looked like a man who had arrived at a decision and was dressed for what came after. She walked to the center of the room and stopped. She did not sit down. She let him speak first. "You called Claire tonight," he said. There it was. She had 1 second to run it. Claire's phone. Kane had access to Claire's phone. Had to, because that was how he'd maintained control over the operation's softest point. She'd called Claire on her own phone, which she'd believed was clean, but Claire's receiving end, "Yes," she said. She didn't try to reframe it. Denial would cost more than it saved. "I called her." "What did you talk about?" "I wanted to know if she was going to be at the dinner." She kept her voice level. "I wanted to know if I needed to manage that." "Manage it how?" "By knowing in advance whether I was going to be in the same room as my sister and my husband." She let a beat pass. "That's not an unreasonable thing to prepare for." He looked at her. His face was doing the thing it did. The surface warmth, the depth underneath it that was calculating something she couldn't fully read. He was running her the same way she'd been running him. She understood that. And the question was who had the more complete information. "She left her apartment 20 minutes ago," he said. "She took a bag." Vivian said nothing. "I'd like to know where she went," he said. "I don't know." She held his eyes. "I told her to take some space before the dinner, that being in the city was putting pressure on her that wasn't useful. I didn't tell her where to go." He studied her. "You're very composed for someone who just found out they're being taken to a meeting they didn't agree to." "You said you wanted to speak to me. I'm here." She gestured at the room. "Speak." Something moved through his expression. Not anger, closer to reassessment. He walked to the window. The city at night, the same skyline backdrop, the same deliberate positioning. "I need to know you're where I think you are," he said, "before the 30th, before we walk into that room together." He turned. "I need to know that what you told me, about choosing a different direction, about being done with Cross, I need to know that's real and not a construction." "What would convince you?" she asked. "Tell me something you haven't told me yet," he said. "Something about him. Something that costs you something to say." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought very carefully about what she was about to do. "He knows something is happening inside the organization," she said. "He doesn't know it's you, but he's been watching the movement of 3 of his men for the past 2 weeks. He thinks there's an external threat, someone trying to get inside through a lower-tier connection. He's not looking internally." She paused. "He won't be walking into the Caloran dinner blind. He'll have his security positioned differently than usual. Not more, differently. 2 of his standard detail reassigned to street level, 1 added inside the building. He thinks the risk is external entry." Kane was very still. "How do you know this?" he asked. "Because he told me," she said. 3 days ago, when he was trying to explain why the next few weeks needed to look normal. He told me enough to explain why I had to maintain my routine." She held his gaze. "He trusts me more than he should right now. He thinks the crisis in our marriage has made me something he needs to handle carefully. He doesn't know that careful handling pushed me toward you." Kane looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Then he walked to the side table and poured 2 glasses of something amber and held one out to her. She took it. She did not drink it. She held it the way you hold a glass at a cocktail party when you have no intention of drinking, present, casual, performing normalcy. "His security positioning," Kane said. "Street level heavy, lighter inside." "1 additional inside," she said. He gave a name, Patterson. He nodded slowly. He was filing it. She watched him file it and knew that she had just given him a piece of information that was true. Patterson was a real name, a real member of Damien's security arrangement, but that the positioning she'd described was the inverse of what Damien had actually told her. Street-level light, inside heavy. She'd flipped it. She had just handed Kane a security map that would tell him Damien's interior coverage was thin when it was in fact the densest it had ever been. "All right," he said. He sounded different, settled, like a man who has just confirmed the ground under his feet. She felt her pulse in her throat. "The dinner is still the moment," he said. "Nothing changes. I need you there at 9. We arrive together. James Calloran will receive us. He'll manage the room's early positioning. By 10, Marchetti will have spoken." He looked at her over the rim of his glass. "By 11, it's done. And Cross?" "Cross will be managed," he said, cleanly. "Not in that room. I want no visibility on it. He'll be separated early in the evening, some arrangement that takes him to a secondary space, and what happens there doesn't happen in front of witnesses." She kept her face absolutely still. Separated early. Secondary space. What happens there? He wasn't planning a public humiliation. He wasn't planning a declaration in front of the families. He was planning to remove Damien Cross permanently and use the dinner as the alibi structure. A room full of witnesses who could attest that business was being conducted normally while the real event happened somewhere they couldn't see. The dinner wasn't the moment. The dinner was the cover. She set her glass down on the nearest surface with a steadiness she did not feel. "I understand," she said. He nodded. "Go home. Get some sleep. And Vivian," he said her name the way he always said it, with the specific warmth that she now read with complete clarity as the warmth of a man who uses charm the way other men use weapons. "I meant what I said. There is absolutely a place for you in what comes next." She looked at him. "I know," she said. She walked out. The car that brought her didn't take her back. She understood that before she reached the lobby, the two men weren't behind her, which meant she was either trusted enough to leave alone or the meeting had concluded in a way that made her continued management unnecessary. She didn't wait to interpret which. She hit the street and turned left and walked for half a block before she pulled out her phone and called the secondary number. Damien picked up in one ring. "Where are you?" His voice had the texture of a man who had been waiting in a state of controlled violence for the past hour and 15 minutes. "East Side, 11 floors. Kane's office building." She was walking fast, head down, the cold cutting through her coat. "I'm on the street. I'm okay." She paused. "I need you to listen and not react until I'm finished." "Talk." She told him everything. She did it in order, walking, her breath visible in the cold air. The meeting, the security information she'd given him, flipped. The arrangement with James Calloran. And then the last part, the part that had been sitting in her chest since she'd said, "I understand," in his office, and kept her face completely still. "He's not planning a public move," she said. "The dinner is a cover. He's going to pull you out of the room, early in the evening, some pretext. And whatever he has arranged for you doesn't happen in front of anyone." The silence on the other end had a particular quality. She had heard Damien Cross silent in many registers over 15 years. This one was new. This was the silence of a man recalibrating every assumption he'd been operating on. "He told you this?" Damien said. "Yes." "He told you that I was going to be—" "He said you'd be managed, cleanly. He said not in that room." She stopped walking. She was at the corner of a block she recognized. 3 blocks from a car she'd left parked 2 days ago, keys in her coat pocket, which was either foresight or luck. And right now she didn't care which. "Damien, he has James Calloran. He has the building. He has whatever he's arranged for the secondary space. This is not a political move. This is an execution with a dinner party as the alibi." The silence stretched. "Tell me the Calloran building's layout," he said. His voice was different now, stripped of everything except function. She told him what she knew, which was less than she wanted. She'd been inside the Calloran family's dinner venue once, 2 years ago, for an event that had nothing to do with any of this. She had the main floor, the entrance configuration, the general layout of the secondary rooms. Not enough. Not nearly enough for what he needed. "I need someone inside that building before the 30th, he said, "before Kane's people have it locked. How much time do we have?" "The building will be controlled by tomorrow night at the latest. If Kane is running this through James Calloran, the staff replacement happens in the 24 hours before the event." He paused. I have one person who can get in as a legitimate hire, catering placement, but I need the secondary room locations before he goes in or he's operating blind. I can get the layout. She was already thinking. James Calloran has a public-facing event management company. They file floor plans with the city's event licensing office for any gathering over 100 people. The Calloran dinner has a standing permit. The floor plan is on file. A pause. How quickly? 2 hours. She was already moving again toward the car. But Damien, when your person is inside, I need him looking for one specific thing beyond the layout. If Kane has arranged a secondary space for you, there will be a preparation in that room. Something brought in. I need to know what it is and where it is before we walk in. He said. I'm still Kane's guest, she said. I'm still walking in with him. If I pull out now, he accelerates whatever his contingency is, and we lose the control we have over the timing. You're not walking into that building. I am. She found the car, got in. Because the moment the room is assembled and Marchetti and Calloran and Kane think everything is in position, I need to be standing in that room where every one of those men can hear me. That's the piece you can't replicate with anyone else. That's the piece that makes the exposure complete. She started the engine. The families will believe what they see in real time. They won't believe a report. They won't believe documentation delivered after the fact. They need to see it happen in that room with their own eyes. He was quiet for a moment. You're going to expose him in front of all of them, he said. Every piece. The money trail, Calloran's son, Marchetti's arrangement, the plan for the secondary room, all of it, in that room, before he gets the chance to pull you out of it. She pulled onto the street. But I need 29 hours to make sure every piece is in a form those men can't dismiss. And I need your person inside that building. He said a name. She repeated it back. She had 30 seconds of description and a meeting point. Vivian. His voice. Just her name. I know, she said. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to tell me to be careful. A pause. I was going to tell you that if anything goes wrong in that room, nothing is going to go wrong, she said. Because I've been building this for 3 weeks, and I know exactly where every piece is. She paused. Trust me. She hung up before he could answer because she needed him to hold that. The unresolved trust, the incomplete sentence. She needed him to sit with it and let it work, because a man who was waiting for the end of a sentence moved differently than a man who thought he knew how everything concluded. She drove. The floor plan took 90 minutes, not 2 hours, because the licensing office's digital archive was more accessible than she'd hoped, and the permit filing for the Calloran family's annual New Year's Eve dinner had been submitted with a level of detail that told her their event planner was meticulous. She had the full layout by 11:30. Main dining hall, kitchen corridor, 3 secondary rooms off the east hallway, a study, a coat room, and a larger private reception space that the permit described as available for breakout sessions during extended event programming. That room had its own exterior access, a door to a private courtyard, which connected to an alley on the building's east side. She stared at that room for a long time. A private room. Exterior access. Away from the dining hall. Away from the other guests. That was where Kane planned to take Damien. She photographed the layout. She sent it to the number Damien had given her with a circle around the breakout room and a single line of text. Here, check the courtyard door and the alley. The response came back in 4 minutes. Understood. Inside by 0600. She set the phone down and pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and sat in the parked car in the cold for a minute. 13 weeks. The baby had no idea. The baby was existing in a completely different reality, a warm and dark and entirely unconcerned reality, and she envied it with a ferocity that surprised her. She took her hands down from her face. She thought about what she needed to construct in the next 29 hours. The documentation package. Everything in a form that men of that world would accept as real in the middle of a room, under pressure, without time to verify. Financial records weren't enough. She needed corroboration, the kind that came from a second source, from something that couldn't have been manufactured by a wife running a private agenda. She needed Kane's own words. She thought about the transmitter in the study. She thought about the 2 evenings of carefully constructed conversation she'd fed through it. And she thought about what Kane didn't know, that the device was a 2-way system, that Ruben Trace had modified it before she placed it, that everything Kane's people received from it, Damien's people also recorded. She had 48 hours of Kane's responses to the transmitter. Every time he received something through that device and acted on it, called someone, changed an arrangement, communicated with Caloran or Marchetti. Those calls had gone through a phone network that Damien's technical people had been monitoring since the splice in the hallway told them Kane's communication infrastructure was built on access rather than independence. She hadn't used it yet. She'd been holding it. She took out her laptop and opened the encrypted file transfer Damien's technical contact had set up for her 2 weeks ago. The files were there. Audio, transcripts, 42 separate communications over 6 days. Kane on the phone with Marchetti, 3 conversations. Kane on the phone with James Caloran, 7. Kane issuing instructions to the 2 men who had come to her building tonight. And 1 conversation, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, recorded the previous afternoon, in which Kane, speaking to James Caloran, described in specific and operational language what was supposed to happen in the breakout room on New Year's Eve and who was supposed to make it happen. She put her headphones in and listened to it once all the way through. Then she sat very still in the car. She had everything, not almost everything, everything. 3 weeks of patience and a Christmas Eve that had broken something in her, and the particular advantage of being underestimated by a man who was very good at most things and had one catastrophic blind spot. He had never genuinely believed that Vivian Sterling was anything more than a wife. An intelligent wife, a composed wife, a wife who had survived 15 years in a difficult world and learned its vocabulary. But a wife. A person defined by her relationship to the man at the center. He had used that assumption like a tool for 3 weeks. She was about to use it like a door. The 29th passed in the particular hell of high-stakes preparation. The kind where every hour has 17 things in it, and your hands need to be steadier than they feel. And you can't tell anyone how frightened you are, because frightened is a variable that affects other people's performance, and you can't afford that right now. She compiled the documentation package. She did it in layers. The financial records first, sourced and annotated in a way that told a clear story without requiring interpretation. Then the audio files. 3 of them selected from the 42, the ones that were the most operationally explicit and the hardest to dismiss as ambiguous. Then a single-page timeline, dates and events, and amounts and names. The kind of document that a room full of intelligent, experienced men could read in 4 minutes and not misunderstand. She had it printed at a shop she'd used before, run by a man who did not ask questions about what he printed, and she had 12 copies made. 12, because there would be 11 principals in the Caloran dining room, and she needed one to keep. She met Damien's inside man, a person she'd never seen before, whose name she was not told and didn't ask for, at 7 in the morning of the 30th, parking garage. 30 seconds. She handed him 2 things, the floor plan with the breakout room circled, and a folded piece of paper with 3 sentences on it that told him exactly what to look for in that room and what to do when he found it. He nodded. He left. She went to a diner 3 blocks away and ordered eggs she didn't eat and coffee she did, and sat for 40 minutes running every scenario she could construct for how the evening could deviate from what she'd planned. She had 7 scenarios. 3 of them she had responses for that she was confident in. 2 of them she had responses for that she was less confident in. 2 of them she didn't have responses for. She thought about those 2 for a long time. The first was, Kane realizes before the dinner that something is wrong. He's running his own risk assessments. He has people watching. If he identifies a gap in what he thinks he knows, if the security positioning she'd given him gets independently verified and comes back wrong, he doesn't wait for the dinner. He moves earlier. And earlier means uncontrolled, means a situation she hasn't built any structure around. The second was simpler and more frightening. The room doesn't believe her. She was going to stand up in a room full of men who had spent their careers operating in a world where women were managed, not consulted. Who would see Damien Cross's wife presenting evidence against a coup and read it first through the lens of a marital dispute playing out on a professional stage. She needed those men to see the evidence before they decided what to do with the person presenting it. She needed the first 30 seconds to be so undeniable that the instinct to dismiss her was overridden by the instinct to protect themselves. She had planned for that. She had built the presentation of it with that specific 30-second window in mind, but she couldn't guarantee it. You couldn't guarantee a room full of men who had survived as long as these men had survived by trusting nothing they hadn't personally verified. She paid for the coffee and left. Kane called at 4 in the afternoon. Tonight, he said. His voice was clean and calm, the voice of a man for whom the plan was running on schedule. 9 o'clock. I'll send a car. I'll be ready, she said. How are you feeling? She almost laughed. She turned it into something else before it reached her face, which was pointless because he couldn't see her, but the habit of managing her expressions had become so complete she did it alone in an empty room. Nervous, she said, but ready. Good. A pause. Nervous is honest. Nervous means you understand the weight of it. I do, she said. See you at 9. She hung up. She sat down on the edge of the bed in the room she'd been using for the past 3 days. Not the apartment, not anywhere Kane's people had touched. And she put her hand flat on her stomach the way she'd been doing since Christmas morning. The way she did it when she needed a reference point. Something that had nothing to do with the calculation and the construction and the fear that she was managing with every breath. I'm going to finish this, she thought. Not to the baby, exactly, not to herself, just into the room, just into the air. She started getting dressed. The car arrived at 8:52. This time, it was a different car. Better. The kind that the Calloran family's guests would arrive in. The kind that told the staff at the door that whoever was inside was expected and not to be looked at twice. Kane was in it. He was wearing the dark suit. He looked at her when she got in with something she recognized as genuine. A version of admiration, which was the most honest thing he'd ever directed at her and also the most wrong, because what he was admiring was the performance of a woman he thought he'd converted, not the woman who had spent 3 weeks taking his plan apart from the inside. You look, he started. Don't, she said, quietly, without hostility. Let's just get there. He nodded. He said nothing else for the duration of the drive. The Calloran building was lit from the outside, tasteful, controlled, the kind of lighting that said money without announcing it. Cars were arriving. She could see figures on the steps. She recognized 2 of them from the backs of their coats, from the way they carried themselves, which was the specific recognition of a woman who'd been in this world long enough to know people by their posture before she saw their faces. She looked for Damien's car. She didn't see it. She told herself that was correct. That was right. He wasn't supposed to be visible yet. Kane put his hand briefly on her arm as they got out of the car. Not possessive. Steadying. Like a man escorting someone into a room that was about to become very significant. She let him do it. She walked up the steps beside him. The doors opened. The warmth and light and sound of the room came out to meet her. Conversation, the low register of music, the specific ambient quality of a gathering of people who are all being extremely careful. She scanned the room in 4 seconds. Marchetti. Near the far wall, with 2 of his people. He glanced up when she entered, and she caught it. The flicker of recognition, and underneath it something else, something careful and watchful. He knew. He was part of it, and he was watching to see how the first minutes of the evening played out. James Calloran. 20 feet to the left, speaking to a man she didn't recognize, positioned near the entrance to the east hallway. The hallway that led to the breakout room. 11 principals. She counted 7 visible. The other 4 were in the room, she just hadn't located them yet. And Damien was not visible. Kane steered her gently to the right, toward a cluster of conversation near the bar arrangement, and she went with him and took a glass of something and held it and talked to 2 men she didn't know for 6 minutes, while her eyes moved through the room behind her composed expression. At 9:22, James Calloran approached Kane with the specific body language of a man delivering a prearranged message. He leaned in, said something she couldn't hear. Kane nodded. He turned to her. I need a moment with James, he said. The hosting arrangements. 10 minutes. She nodded. She watched them move toward the east hallway. She waited exactly 90 seconds. Then she crossed the room to where Marchetti was standing. He watched her come. I was a big man. Broader than she'd remembered, somehow. Or maybe it was the suit. Or maybe it was the fact that he was standing in a room where he'd already committed himself to a direction, and he knew it, and she knew it, and they were both pretending this was a social conversation. Mrs. Cross, he said. Mr. Marchetti. She kept her voice pleasant. She reached into her bag. I have something for you, and for everyone in this room. I'd like 5 minutes of your time before Mr. Kane returns. He looked at the document she was holding out to him. He looked at her face. What is this? he said. The reason you should read it before he gets back, she said, is that what's in it describes exactly what he has planned for you and everyone else in this room the moment he's finished with my husband. Marchetti didn't take the document immediately. She held it out, kept holding it, kept his eyes. He took it. She turned to the room. 11 principles, 9 now visible, her 12 copies. The audio files loaded on the tablet in her bag, connected to the speaker arrangement she'd asked the inside man to verify was still in place. She thought about Damien, about where he was, about the breakout room. She thought about 13 weeks and a heartbeat on a screen. She pulled the tablet from her bag. She said, not loudly, but clearly, in the specific register that carries across a room without requiring people to turn toward it, I need everyone's attention. The room began to shift toward her. Kane's voice came from the hallway entrance. Vivian? She turned and looked at him across the room, across the assembled faces of every man who mattered in this world. With the tablet open in her hand and 12 copies of the document spreading through the room from Marchetti outward. He was standing very still. He was reading what was in the room. He was reading her. You should hear this too, she said. It concerns you more than anyone. His face did something she'd never seen it do before, and she pressed play. Part 5, Hối kẹt của kịch bản điện ảnh này được triển khai với dung lượng viết đủ 4.500 từ. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của Part 4. Yêu cầu bắt đầu bằng việc giải quyết triệt để đỉnh điểm cao trào từ phần trước. Cuộc đối đầu cuối cùng phải diễn ra khốc liệt và chân thực, nơi mỗi cái giá phải trả đều trở nên đắt đỏ và không có chiến thắng nào là dễ dàng. Hãy đảm bảo mỗi nút thắt, bí mật và mâu thuẫn từ Part 1 được phơi bày và xử lý trọn vẹn, standalone ending, không để lại bất kỳ chi tiết thùa hay mở ra phần tiếp theo. Duy trì giọng văn Mỹ thô ráp nhưng sâu lắng, tập trung vào sự biến đổi nội tâm của nhân vật sau cơn bão. Hội thoại trong phần này cần mang sức nặng của sự trao đổi, cay đắng và chân thực, lồng ghép tinh tế những thông điệp về bản chất con người và ý chí sinh tồn thông qua hành động thay vì triết lý suông. Hãy kể theo ngôi thứ 3, triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh, scene by scene, với nhịp điệu chậm dần về cuối để tạo sự lắng động, tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết từng ánh mắt, cử chỉ và hơi thở cuối cùng của câu chuyện. Nếu đặt giới hạn phản hồi, hãy dừng lại ở một câu rạng rỡ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp nhằm đảm bảo độ sâu sắc nhất cho kịch bản lồng tiếng 2 tiếng. Si chai dan bat buoki. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng. Nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dừng giữa câu hay viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh không mở rộng nội dung. Message collapsed. The audio filled the room like something physical. Kane's voice came through the speaker arrangement clean and flat and unmistakable. The recording from 3 days prior, 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Kane on the phone with James Calloran, describing in operational language what was supposed to happen in the breakout room and who was supposed to make it happen. There was no ambiguity in it. There was no interpretation required. It was a man issuing instructions for the permanent removal of another man, using the specific vocabulary of people who have done this before and intend to do it again. The room didn't move for the first 30 seconds. That was the window she'd planned for. She watched it happen. The stillness of 11 men processing something that contradicted the version of this evening they'd arrived with. Marchetti had the document in his hands, and he was looking at it, and then looking at the speaker, and then looking at Kane with an expression that had shed every layer of the controlled surface he'd maintained for 20 years in rooms like this one. James Calloran moved first. He was closest to the hallway, closest to the exit, and his movement was involuntary. A single step backward, the step of a man whose body has registered danger before his mind has finished the sentence. She saw it and noted it and let it go, because Calloran wasn't the problem right now. Kane was the problem. I was standing at the hallway entrance, and he was looking at her across the room with an expression she had never seen on a human face before. Not quite rage, not quite the controlled blankness he used for everything else. Something between them. Something that was deciding very rapidly what it was going to become. He said her name. Just her name. Quiet. The way you say something when you're not yet sure what comes after it. I've given everyone in this room a copy of the financial documentation, she said, addressing the assembled principals without raising her voice. The audio speaks for itself. The document on page 3 shows the money trail, 12 transfers, 4 months, the holding structure Mr. Kane built to fund the transition he was planning. Page 5 has the communication log between Mr. Kane and James Calloran over the past 8 weeks. She paused. Page 7 has the arrangement Mr. Kane offered to Mr. Marchetti, including the specific concessions promised in exchange for his public support tonight. Marchetti made a sound, not a word. A sound. I didn't... He stopped. He looked at Kane. His face had gone somewhere past anger into something colder and more dangerous. You put this in a document. Kane said nothing. You put my name in a document, Marchetti said. His voice was very quiet. The room understood what that meant better than any explanation could convey. Kane moved. She had anticipated movement, had spent 29 hours anticipating it, but the speed of it was still something she registered in her chest before her mind caught up. He crossed the room in 8 steps, not toward her, toward the east hallway, and she understood in the same instant that his target was not an exit, but the breakout room. And in the breakout room there were arrangements he'd made for this evening that he was now trying to reach before anyone else did. He didn't make it to the hallway. Damian Cross came through the main entrance. He came in with 4 men she recognized from the organization's inner security arrangement, and the quality of his entrance was nothing like the arrivals the other principals had made. No social calibration, no greeting posture, no adjustment for the room's expectations. He came in moving, and the 4 men spread naturally as they entered, which covered the room's primary exit points in the particular way that told everyone present that this was not a reaction to the evening's events, but a prepared position that had been held outside that door for the past 40 minutes. Kane stopped. The room stopped. Damian looked at Kane across 40 feet of Calloran family dining room. He looked at him the way he looked at things he had already decided about. Not with anger, not with the performance of anger, but with the flat final assessment of a man for whom the decision has been made and what remains is only execution. There are 2 men in the breakout room, Damian said. Not to Kane specifically, to the room. My people have them. Whatever was arranged for that room tonight is not going to happen. He looked at Marchetti. You have a choice to make right now about what side of this you're standing on. I'd suggest you make it quickly. Marchetti looked at Kane. He looked at the document in his hands. He looked at Damian. He stepped to the left, just 1 step. Lateral movement, away from Kane's position toward the room's center. It was the smallest possible physical declaration, and it was completely unambiguous. Kane looked at that step, and something in his face resolved into something she could finally read clearly. He understood that the room was gone. He had built 3 weeks of architecture toward this evening, and in the span of 4 minutes it had come down. And he was standing in the wreckage of it, in front of every man whose respect he'd needed to make the next step possible. He looked at Vivian. How long? He asked. Since the morning after Christmas, she said. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it. The specific, terrible arithmetic of realizing that the person you were running against had been running against you from the same starting point, and that you had handed her every tool she needed while believing you were taking things from her. I underestimated, he said. Yes, she said. You did. He looked at her for another moment. There was something in it she hadn't prepared for. Not admiration, not rage, but a kind of bleak recognition, one professional to another, that carried its own weight regardless of everything else it was surrounded by. Then Damian's men moved, and Vincent Kane stopped being a problem that required her attention. She didn't watch what happened next. She turned away and walked to the far end of the room, near the windows, and stood with her back to the activity and her hand pressed flat against the cold glass and breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The room behind her was loud for approximately 90 seconds, and then it was quieter, and then it was the specific quiet of a situation that has resolved into its aftermath. Marchetti came to stand beside her. She hadn't heard him approach. She registered his presence without turning. The document, he said, the arrangement he offered me, is accurate, she said. A pause. What do you want for it? She turned and looked at him. He was 67 years old, and he'd been in this world since his early 20s, and his face had the specific texture of a man who had paid for everything he had with something real. He was not, she understood, a man asking for mercy. He was a man asking for terms. I want your word, she said, that what was arranged tonight, what Kane built, what Caloran's son agreed to, that you speak to it, accurately, to anyone who asks. You want a witness, he said. I want the truth told by someone who was in the room. She held his gaze. You were going to let him take my husband out of that room tonight. He didn't look away. Yes. I want you to remember that, she said. When you speak to it, I want that part included. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. The nod of a man making a commitment he intended to keep because the alternative was worse. She turned back to the window. He left. Damien found her 20 minutes later. The room had emptied. The principals had been directed in the specific diplomatic language of a situation that requires everyone to believe they're leaving of their own accord, toward the exits. The Caloran family's staff had been replaced by faces she recognized from Damien's organization. James Caloran was somewhere in the building being asked questions he was going to answer completely because the alternative had been made very clear to him. Damien came to stand behind her. She saw his reflection in the cold glass, his face, the set of his shoulders, the specific exhaustion of a man who has been holding a position under extreme tension for hours and has just been permitted to release it. He didn't touch her immediately. It's done, he said. I know. Kane is... I know, she said again. She didn't need the specifics, not tonight. He was quiet for a moment. The two men in the breakout room, they talked. They always talk, she said. That's why he used people who didn't know the full picture. Compartmentalization. She paused. He was meticulous about most things. Most things, Damien repeated. He didn't account for the possibility that I was paying attention from the beginning, she said. That was the gap. She heard him breathe. She watched his reflection. He was looking at the back of her head, and his expression was doing the complicated things she'd seen glimpses of all week. The things she still didn't have a clean name for, that lived somewhere between what they'd been to each other and what they'd broken, and what was standing in the rubble of both. I need to say something, he said. She turned around. He looked at her in the near-empty room with the city visible through the glass behind her, and he said, I know that what I did, Claire, the months of it, I know there is no version of that which I can explain into something smaller than what it was. She waited. I'm not going to try, he said. I'm just going to say that I know what it cost you to come back to that house, and to stay, and to do... He gestured briefly at the room, the evening, everything it represented. All of this. She looked at him. He looked exhausted in the way that men who don't permit themselves exhaustion look when it finally arrives. Stripped, slightly diminished, more human than usual. She had loved him for 15 years in the way you love a landscape. Not because it's always beautiful, but because it's the one you know, the one whose changes you've tracked season by season, the one that has shaped your sense of what the world looks like from wherever you're standing. She didn't know, even now, whether she still did. I came back for the right reasons, she said. Not all of them were you. He nodded. He understood the distinction. But I'm still here, she said. That's also true. He reached out and put his hand against her face the same way he had in the cold garment district room 3 days ago. Palm flat, deliberate, the rationed warmth that cost him something. She let him do it. A boy, he said quietly. Or a girl. I have an appointment in 2 weeks, she said. We'll know then. We, he said. The same word she'd used earlier in the evening, and it landed differently now, in this emptied room, after everything. We, she confirmed. He dropped his hand. He looked at the glass behind her, at the city, at the new year that was approximately 40 minutes away from arriving. What happens now, he said, to the organization, to... That's a conversation for January, she said, not tonight. He almost smiled. It didn't quite complete itself, but it was closer than she'd seen from him in weeks. January, he agreed. She picked up her bag from the floor where she'd set it. She looked around the room, the scattered remnants of the evening, 12 copies of a document she'd spent 3 weeks building, the speaker setup her inside man had confirmed, and which had done precisely what she'd designed it to do. I want to go home, she said. Which one? She thought about the mountain house, the Christmas lights still running on a timer, the kitchen table where she'd sat with her hands flat on the wood and found out she was capable of making a decision in the worst moment she'd ever occupied. The mountain house, she said. I want to sleep in my parents' house. He nodded. He didn't ask questions. He walked beside her toward the door, and she noticed without commenting on it that he positioned himself slightly to her left and slightly behind, which was the specific way he moved in uncertain situations. Not in front of her, not directing, but present and proximate, which was probably the closest thing to tenderness that his particular construction permitted. She let it be what it was. They walked out. The mountain house in January looked different than it had on Christmas Eve. Not the structure, the same stone, the same porch, the same trees crowding the upper hillside. But the quality of light was different in January, less tentative than December, and the Christmas lights she'd left on the timer had finally exhausted the setting she'd programmed and gone dark. The house looked like itself without decoration, quiet and solid and older than any of the trouble she'd carried up the mountain. She walked through it on the first morning. Damien was still asleep. He'd slept for 11 hours, which was the most she'd ever observed from him in 15 years, and which told her something about the cumulative weight of the past month that he hadn't put into words. She walked through the rooms alone in the early light with a cup of tea that had gone lukewarm, and she touched things as she passed them. The doorframe of the hallway, the kitchen table, the windowsill in the back room where her mother used to sit. She thought about what came next. Not the organization, not yet. That was January, and January had only just begun. But the shape of it was already present in her mind, the way the shape of something is present in stone before it's been worked. You can see it if you know what you're looking for. The empire that Damien had built on fear and proximity and the credible threat of consequence was structurally sound in some places and catastrophically fragile in others, and she knew which places were which because she'd spent 15 years watching it from a position that no one inside it had ever properly accounted for. She was going to change it, not dismantle it. She wasn't naive about what dismantling it would mean, what it would leave behind, who it would hurt in the vacuum it created, but rebuild it from the inside, the way you renovate a building by understanding its load-bearing points and working with them instead of against them. Legitimate business, where legitimate business could be sustained. Strategic alliances built on mutual interest rather than mutual fear. The charitable work that the organization's money could fund, if it was directed by someone who understood that a city's loyalty was more durable than its terror. She would be the architect of that, not the face. Damien would remain the face, the name, the presence, the weight that the world outside associated with the Cross organization. But the decisions, the direction, the slow and deliberate transformation of what it was into something that could survive in the open instead of only in the dark, that would be hers. She had earned it. She stood at the kitchen window with her lukewarm tea and looked at the trees on the upper hillside and felt the child move. It was the first time. 13 weeks was early for movement. She knew that. She'd known it with the 2 pregnancies that had ended and the one that hadn't. But she felt something, a small interior shift, the particular sensation that was not quite what she'd expected and entirely unmistakable. She stood very still. She put her hand flat on her stomach. It didn't happen again. But it had happened once, and once was enough to change the quality of everything around it. Claire came to the mountain house on the 5th of January. Vivian had called her the day after New Year's Eve, a brief call, practical, telling her that the situation was resolved and she was no longer at risk, and the address she'd been sent to was no longer necessary. Claire had said very little on that call. She'd said thank you, which felt inadequate, and she'd said I'm sorry, which also felt inadequate but was at least honest, and they'd left it there. When she arrived on the 5th, she looked like someone who had been doing a significant amount of thinking in a short period of time. She looked like the aftermath of that thinking, the specific quality of a person who has arrived at conclusions about themselves that aren't comfortable to hold but can't be put down. Vivian made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of them said anything. I knew something was wrong, Claire said finally. With Kane. Not at the beginning. At the beginning, I just thought he was... She stopped, looked at her hands. I thought someone was paying attention to me the way I wanted to be paid attention to. And I didn't ask the right questions because I didn't want the answers. Vivian said nothing. She let her sister have the words without interruption. And with Damien, Claire looked up, met her eyes. I told myself it was real. I told myself it was different from what it looked like. She stopped again. I was wrong about what I was doing and I knew it and I kept doing it anyway. That's the part I can't make smaller. No, Vivian said. You can't. Claire absorbed that without flinching. Are you ever going to— I don't know, Vivian said. I'm not going to pretend I know that yet. That's fair. It's honest, Vivian said. Fair is a different thing. Claire looked at her across the table. Something in her expression shifted. Not hurt. Something more complicated than hurt. The expression of a younger sister finally, fully seeing an older sister as a separate and complete person rather than as a role in the story of her own life. You're different, Claire said. I've always been this, Vivian said. You just didn't know what to look for. Claire nodded slowly. She looked at the kitchen table, at the worn wood grain, at the specific surface of a table that had held 30 years of family meals and arguments and silences. What do I do now? She asked. Not helplessly, practically. The question of a person who has decided to start from an accurate position rather than a comfortable one. You go somewhere and you build something that's yours, Vivian said. Not an arrangement with someone who wants to use you, not a reflection of what someone else needs. Something that belongs to you because you built it. That sounds, Claire started. Hard, Vivian said. I know. They sat for a while longer with the coffee and the quiet of the mountain house around them. When Claire left, she hugged Vivian at the door, held on for a second longer than usual, the way you hold on when you're not sure when the next time will be. Vivian held back. Not with warmth, not yet, not the uncomplicated warmth of before, but with the recognition of blood and history and the complicated truth that people who have hurt you badly are sometimes still people you can't fully let go of, and that carrying both of those facts at the same time was not weakness, but just the actual texture of having a family. She watched Claire's car go down the mountain road until she couldn't see it anymore. Damien found her that evening on the back porch. She'd been sitting there for an hour in the cold, wrapped in a blanket she'd found in the hall closet, watching the light go out of the sky the way it went out in winter. Fast, committed, no lingering. He came out and stood for a moment and then sat down in the other chair, which had been her father's, and which no one sat in as a matter of unspoken habit. He sat in it now, without comment. How was she, he said. Honest, Vivian said. For probably the first time in a while. He nodded. He looked at the darkening hillside. She's not a bad person, he said. I want to say that. I'm not— I know what she is, Vivian said. You don't have to characterize her for me. He was quiet. What you did, she said after a moment. Not accusatory, just beginning a sentence. The 7 months. I'm not going to talk about it constantly. I'm not going to make it the ground we stand on forever. But I need you to understand that I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen either. She looked at the hillside. It happened. It changed something. And what we build from here, if we build anything, gets built on top of the fact that it happened, not instead of it. He was very still in her father's chair. I understand, he said. Do you? Yes. He said it the way he said things he meant fully, without elaboration, without qualification. She looked at him. The darkness was coming in quickly now, the hillside losing its definition, the trees becoming silhouettes. He looked older than she usually thought of him as looking, not decrepit, not diminished, just the specific age of a man who had been in a particular kind of fight for a particular kind of long time and was finally, in this moment, not fighting. I want to show you something, she said. She reached into the pocket of her coat. She took out the ultrasound image, the one from Christmas Eve, creased now from weeks in that pocket, the paper worn at the fold. She held it out. He took it. He looked at it for a long time. She watched his face in the fading light, watched the controlled surface of Damien Cross encounter something it had no appropriate response to, and then let that response happen anyway. His jaw worked. His eyes stayed on the small, grainy image. 13 weeks in this one, she said. The appointment next week will have a better picture. He said nothing for a while. I want to be there, he said, for the appointment. I know you do. Will you let me? She looked at the darkening trees. She thought about Christmas Eve, about the car in the driveway and the door she'd pushed open, and the decision she'd made in a motel room on a highway with a test result in her hand. She thought about 3 weeks of building something in the dark with the patience of a person who had decided that what she was building mattered more than what it was costing her. Yes, she said. He looked at the ultrasound image for another moment. Then he handed it back to her carefully, The way you handle something that has established its own value by surviving things. She put it back in her pocket. They sat on the porch in the dark for a while, not talking, the cold settling around them with the particular weight of January in the mountains. A car passed on the highway far below, its lights briefly visible through the trees and then gone. An animal moved somewhere on the upper hillside. Just a sound, a small displacement in the underbrush, there and then not there. "I've been thinking about the Hargrove properties," she said eventually. He looked at her. "The warehouse holdings. They're legitimate. They've been legitimate for 3 years. There's no reason they need to stay connected to the rest of it." She kept her voice practical, unadorned, the tone she used when she wanted him to hear the idea before he heard the implication of it. If they're separated structurally and managed through a real estate holding company with a clean board, they generate the same revenue and they don't carry the exposure. A real estate company with real tenants and a real accountant. She paused. "The first step." He was quiet. "Of many," she added. He looked at the dark hillside for a long moment. She didn't push it. She had learned patience the way most people learn it, through the failure of impatience. And she understood that Damien required a different pace with ideas that asked him to become something different from what he'd always been. "You'd run it," he said. Not a question. "I'd build it," she said. "There's a difference." He thought about that. She watched him think about it the way she'd watched him think about things for 15 years. The stillness of it, the quality of attention, the sense of a mind working through something without visible evidence of the machinery. "All right," he said. She nodded. She looked at the sky, which had gone fully dark now, the first stars coming through in the patches between clouds. A new year. The specific blankness of a year that had not yet been filled with anything, that was still entirely potential, entirely unwritten. She thought about Adrian. The name had come to her 3 days ago, unprompted, in the middle of reading a property document, and it had arrived with the quiet certainty of something that had been waiting for her to be ready to receive it. She hadn't said it aloud yet. She was keeping it for a while longer, keeping it the way she'd kept the pregnancy itself, privately, as something that belonged to her alone until she understood it well enough to share it. Adrian Cross. Born in a year that would be different from the one he'd been conceived in, to parents who had survived the worst of what they were capable of doing to each other and had arrived, bloodied and exhausted and clear-eyed, on the other side of it. He would not inherit a kingdom built on fear. She would make sure of that. Not through one decision, not through one evening's work, not through any single act of courage or calculation. Through the slow, unglamorous, relentless work of building something better. One piece at a time, in the dark, without acknowledgement, the way all real transformation happens, invisibly, until it isn't invisible anymore. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, Damien Cross sat in her father's chair and looked at the mountains he couldn't see in the dark, and she looked at them beside him, and the new year held its silence around them like something that was not yet sure what it was going to be. That was all right. Neither was she. Neither, for that matter, was the small life rearranging itself in the warm dark of her, entirely unaware that the world it was being born into had been fought for, had been taken apart and rebuilt in the space of 31 days in winter, had been made. Not perfect, not clean, not free of everything that had broken it, but better than it was. And better, she had decided, was enough. Better was where you started.